most original and creative talent in our business. Would you welcome Mr. Orson Welles?
Ladies and gentlemen, Orson Welles again, come to call for another visit.
Good evening. This is Orson Welles.
Stay tuned.
Right after this episode,
for our discussion.
This is Orson Welles, speaking from Washington. Today I saw Franklin Roosevelt sworn into the highest public office in America for a fourth term.
Orson Welles brings you the Eversharp Almanac, a new radio feature presented by the makers of Eversharp Skyline pens, repeater pencils, desk sets, and Eversharp Red Top Lead. Have you seen the new Eversharp 64 pen and pencil set, priced at $64? When we created this set, named after Eversharp's famous $64 question, we vowed it must reflect all the beauty, all the superlative writing ability, all the value that $64 can deliver. Here's 14-karat gold throughout, used generously in combination with striking colored plastics. The tip of the 64 is hooded, streamlined, directional. It's actually self-blotting, requires no blotter with quick-dry ink, writes perfectly with any ink. The magic point is so smooth you can't even hear it write, and famed magic feed prevents flooding or leaking high on a plane, so at ground level, too. Service on both pen and matching Eversharp 64 repeater pencil is guaranteed, not for years, not for life, but guaranteed forever. And now, Orson Welles.
I've just come from the 46th inauguration of the American presidency. The whole affair was as simple as anybody can remember. If you've been married more than twice, you like your wedding to be small and quiet. And I think that's how the president felt about it today. He played his part in the ritual like a veteran bridegroom. And I got the feeling that this fourth term was his favorite wife. I don't mean to be frivolous. The inauguration of a president really is a kind of betrothal, with promises to love, honor, and obey. I always feel like crying at a wedding. That's how I felt this afternoon. Standing there on the Capitol steps, I fell to thinking of the whole of our American presidency. The presidents who've gone before, the great and good and ordinary, the well-remembered, the men almost forgotten. George Washington we always think of as the perfect figure of poise. But he was nervous at the first inauguration. His hand trembled and his voice shook so that it could scarcely be heard when he took his oath. That was on an open balcony in New York, overlooking Wall Street. Jefferson was the first to be inaugurated in the new capital of Washington. It was little more than a frontier hamlet in those days, a clearing in the wilderness. There was a mile of swamp between the Capitol and the White House, and Pennsylvania Avenue was nothing but a long stretch of dirty mud. John Adams had been driven to the ceremony in a gilded coach drawn by 6 white horses. But Jefferson, with a few friends, walked quietly from his lodgings to the Capitol to take his oath. Then there was Andrew Jackson, as the first president from the West. He was the idol of the backwoods. And from the wildest country, from the depths of our American forest, the common man came crowding the streets of the Capitol to cheer old Hickory. They wore buckskin and they chewed tobacco and they swore horribly and magnificently. They were 10,000. Most of them were drunk. They trooped after the new president of the executive mansion. They muddied up the carpets and they stood on the chairs. They broke furniture and yanked the draperies from the walls. And great tubs of punch had to be set up on the White House lawn to lure them out again. This was their day. They didn't care who knew it. And there was Lincoln's first inauguration, with the debater Stephen Douglas, Abe's antagonist, taking the president's old stovepipe hat and holding it during the president's address. And 4 years after that, the president 4 years older, with malice toward none, with charity to all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. And there were Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, and in our easy memories, Coolidge and Hoover and Franklin Roosevelt. I watched the last of these for the first time in our American history take the oath for a fourth term. Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative, I don't care what you are. This is a day to stop and think about. A date for history. I've had the impudence to write an open letter to the president. And if you'll forgive me, I'm going to read it tonight on this program. But first, a word from our sponsors.
It isn't an ordinary occurrence, but when it does occur, it makes its mark. Sometimes those people, those organizations who do great things, suddenly do something greater. Boeing did that when they made the Flying Fortress. Norman Rockwell did it when he painted the Four Freedoms. And Eversharp did it when they created, at your command, the Command Performance Gift Set. When you have put all you have into something you do, it is difficult to say you have done something better. Yet that is exactly what happened in this beautiful all-gold Eversharp pen and pencil set. Made of 14-karat gold throughout, streamlined, with a simplicity of design that is, and always has been, the essence of good taste. This set can be engraved, as beautiful as fine jewelry, with name, date, military rank, or occasion. And both pen and pencil have deep pocket clips that meet military regulations. There are a limited number of Eversharp Command Performance sets at distinguished Eversharp dealers. They are priced at $125, handsomely packaged in a distinctive presentation case with service on pen and new featherweight repeater pencil guaranteed. Not for years, not for life, but guaranteed forever. See this set. Compare. Comparison proves. Give Eversharp, and you give the finest. And now, Orson Welles.
To Mr. Franklin Roosevelt, President of the United States of America, an open letter. Mr. President, you are about to assume, for a fourth term, the leadership of the greatest government on earth. Very few indeed among the people who voted for you, Mr. Roosevelt, believe in a fourth term or even a third term. They voted for you in 1940 because you led the fight for Lend-Lease. Because in 1940, against bitter opposition by the isolationists and by the communists, you made it possible for America to aid Britain in its darkest hours. Because in spite of anti-Russians in 1941, you extended Lend-Lease to the Soviet Union because you did much to prepare us for this war, and because, under your command, our forces are succeeding on all fronts. As much as any man, you helped to found and hold together that mighty coalition of nations which is winning the war and which soon must win the peace. Mr. President, I voted for you. I campaigned for your re-election. But I was not unmindful of your record of failure. The great liberal who opposed you for re-election 4 years ago accused you of compromise at home and abroad. Compromise on the excuse of political and military expediency. That compromise, said Wendell Willkie, cost America its position in moral leadership. You have made your mistakes. We have not forgotten them. But we believe that you have been our president long enough to learn from them. You were a poor friend of the League. In 1933, you threw a monkey wrench into the London Economic Conference. You have been guilty of appeasement. You appeased Japan. It cannot be denied that you did this. You used the Neutrality Act against the Spaniards fighting for democracy, and you did not apply it against the Japanese aggressor. You recognized Vichy. For a long time, you would not recognize de Gaulle. You were not unkind to Admiral Darlan, and your ambassador is the friend of Franco. You are the head of the first republic of the world, and we have not forgotten that you helped revive the dying monarchy of Italy. Mr. President, the great powers aren't enough. The warmest understanding, the friendliest of agreements cannot underpin security for the world peoples. The only basis for world peace is world democracy. That means the smallest of the small nations, the poorest of poor peoples, must have their vote in the World Congress. What do you say, Mr. President? Germany must never have the chance again to build an army. The empire of Japan must be destroyed. But all nations must be answerable to law, and that law must be firmly grounded on justice. Like our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, it must be based on moral principles and the fundamentals of human decency. The World Constitution and the World Bill of Rights must be written soon. The drafting must start now. What do you say, Mr. President? Let's hear from you. Before you is the biggest single job entrusted to a single man in the whole long history of the human race. Like every man, you surely have your moments of humility and even of self-doubt. It may occur to you in these moments that you aren't big enough for that big job. Mr. President, we who campaign for you are sure you are. We who voted for you believe it. Every American prays that you're big enough. Today, when you take your oath of office, when you put your hand on the Bible and swear that you will faithfully discharge your duties, we know you're joining all of us in humble prayer. Mr. President, your opportunity is for the realization of a dream. It's an old dream. Before they built the pyramids, they knew it. Before they built the Wall of China, they knew it in Greece and Rome and Paris and in Springfield, Illinois. Yours is the chance to make that dream come true. Most of the people who live on this planet are good people. These good people, Mr. President, look up to you. You are expected to be the architect-in-chief of democratic peace. This is a righteous war. This is a cause for which brave men and women gave their lives. A prayer for every living soul enlisted on the side of progress. And right or wrong, Mr. President, whether you deserve it or whether you don't, you are the representative of that democratic faith. Few wars have been good, but every war is a lesson. This is the moment for the race of Adam to graduate from that terrible university of blood. Mr. President, the chance of the age that may someday bear your name is to realize civilization. Before this, we've only been making sketches for it. Now let's get to work. It's up to all of us. But more than any man, Mr. President, it's up to you. Remember that. Remember the Constitution you are swearing to support. Remember the word quoted in the book on which you make that pledge. Remember the Atlantic Charter, which you helped to write. All our yesterdays are waiting behind you as you take your oath. The endless pageant of terror and torment, slavery and oppression. Tomorrow, nameless, faceless, formless, waits before you. Mr. President, remember the heroes, the helpless dead that sleep beneath your feet under the earth. Remember the unborn, waiting hopefully in the loins of the world's people. Remember them. So help you God.
Ladies and gentlemen, this program comes to you every Friday evening at 7:30. Orson Welles' Eversharp Almanac is brought to you by the makers of Eversharp Skyline pens, repeater pencils, desk sets, and Eversharp Red Top Lead. Service on all Eversharp pens from $5 up and on all Eversharp repeater pencils, regardless of price, is guaranteed forever. This means if your Eversharp should fail to give you satisfactory service at any time, we will put it in good order for a flat charge of 35 cents to cover postage, insurance, and handling, provided all parts, regardless of their condition, are returned. Remember, this service is guaranteed, not for years, not for life, but guaranteed forever. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
Well, hello again. This is Buck Benny speaking. I am so excited to have Vincent Longo back, and we're going to be talking about Orson Welles. This is awesome. And Kathy Fuller-Seeley's here. So the three of us will take you on a wonderful journey through with Orson Welles and about the inauguration of FDR for his fourth inauguration. That's crazy, because but we'll talk all about that and why we don't have the fourth term of won't be having the fourth term of Trump anytime soon, I don't think. And but we shall chat. So let's go ahead and start up. This is the Eversharp commentaries. We don't believe they were ever aired, though it sure sounds like they were because the commercials are all built in and everything. But it's everything I've read has said they were never aired, and I have nothing that proves otherwise, so I'm going to assume they weren't. So maybe this is your first time ever hearing this, which would be lovely. The FDR took office for the fourth time and lived through his inauguration, but then about 80 days later he passed away. So but at least this was recorded when he was still alive, which is great. And that's what's cool about these commentaries, these first set, because we had the 60 plus episode commentaries that we've already done intros for all of those, and those take place after this. So those ones, FDR's gone, and it's all about Truman being the president. And in this case, during these commentaries, FDR's alive, the war's not over yet. It's a few months earlier, but there's big things that happen in those few months between the two sets of commentaries, and so it's neat having these earlier commentaries. Anyway, let's go with over to Vincent. What stood out to you in this commentary, and what was going on with Orson at the time? You're usually telling us that sort of thing, and let's go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Buck. So, yeah, I will say, just as a general refresher, it is always sort of eerie hearing these because they are set up as if they really were broadcasted. Yeah. So the fact that they were not, and presumably they were all recorded and written between December 1944 and January 1945, this being the final episode, presumably around January 20th, 1945, when FDR's inauguration was. It's just worth also reminding people that Eversharp dropped Welles seemingly for being too political. Also, they claimed his show was not properly using the material, whatever that means. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. But really, they just abandoned him for the vogue of hot big band jazz. That's what they ended up doing with this program instead. So, you trade a burning liberal for equally burning hot swing jazz. So
did Orson come on every week and introduce the jazz that they were going to be playing and so forth, or did they sever their relationship with him entirely? I'm not sure.
Yeah, they just cut him. I mean, so I think Milton Berle was had an Eversharp sponsorship as well, and they dropped him for Hal McIntyre's orchestra, if I remember correctly.
With a pen stroke.
Yeah. Well, and you can see the similarities between Orson Welles and Milton Berle and the whole jazz thing, that they at least were shooting in the same vein all the time. They never tried anything different. So. Oh, well.
Yeah. So Welles, I mean, he's in a transitionary phase in his career largely. I mean, he did spend most of 1944 campaigning for FDR, working as his ghostwriter, as a prominent campaigner as well, doing lots of speeches and all kinds of work with him. Worked with FDR's advisor. We in another episode about Welles, we talk about Wells supposedly getting this cane for FDR for being such a trusted campaigner, although Wells seems to suggest that he probably got that cane from someone else and not directly from FDR. But, he's very close to FDR. And what I like about this episode and what surprised me is that it's one of the few places that Wells really, really chastises FDR, as much as he also hails him like he does everywhere. I mean, he really gives it to him. And I feel like it's a sort of thing where, Wells believed in FDR becoming, president again for many reasons, which we'll talk about. But he like sort of, maybe he told him to his face, I don't know, but you sort of like hold your tongue, right? You're not going to say that on a campaign trail, like, man, FDR has screwed up so many times. He's just like holding it. And then finally he's inaugurated, he's in, doesn't matter. Wells just like says, hey, here's everything that I've had pent up that that you deserve criticism for. And so I really appreciate that because, obviously, as you said, Buck, quickly after this, FDR dies, and we never get criticism of FDR from Wells again. In his subsequent show, The Commentaries, FDR is a god, essentially. Though we do get a bit of that here. He's definitely a crown, as Kathy is miming.
Yeah. Yes.
We do definitely get that here. Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. An angel on high. But I think it we'll talk more specifically about that, but I think that is why this episode is really worth remembering as we reflect on Wells's own politics, because it's easy to say that, oh, Wells was a liberal and Wells was the most big supporter of FDR. And I think, honestly, even we've been doing these commentaries, sometimes I forget the immense differences between FDR's politics and Wells's. And I think we should continue to talk about that in this episode because Wells makes it abundantly clear what he thinks FDR's politics should be. And the commentaries, I think I've always assumed that they're this one and the same. And that's not fair to FDR. And that's really not fair to Wells because as we see here, he's got lots of problems with FDR's policy. So that's why I really appreciate this episode.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It was like, I think it's so important. I just don't feel like it would be closure to everything we're doing. This is a great last episode, honestly, of the commentaries altogether. I'm kind of glad we did it in the order we did it because had we done these first, then it would have kind of changed the view we had of Orson and FDR throughout the other. By listening to the others first, it just made you feel like this episode, to me anyway, was a complete surprise in that I was just going into it. I was thinking, okay, he's just going to praise FDR like he always does. But man, he lays into it. And man, he says, here's all the things that you messed up and could have done better and the things you need to fix going forward. And and we just would have never gotten this feel, I mean, that you get from this. And so I think it's a great piece to add on to I may at some point play his tribute episode to FDR and this one as a package because it's interesting to hear those two separate things after he passes and before he passes as to how Orson's dealing with him. Anyway,
can I just say quickly, Buck, sorry, Kathy, I just want to say on one thing you said is like it sort of surprised you. That's one thing I also would note about this episode is like it constantly surprises you in ways you expect at the beginning. Oh, it's going to be FDR tribute. Then it's like this tribute to the American presidency, even presidents that there is no way that Wells thought were really good presidents. I mean, he sort of mentions, so for example, he has at the beginning talks about all these presidents and their inaugurations. Yeah. And he mentions Jackson in particular, and he mentions Jackson in a kind of a backhanded way, as listeners will notice. Like he really kind of makes fun of his supporters. Everybody who supported Jackson was podunk from the West and the sticks, and they were drunk and taken over. I don't know if any of that's true. I'm sure part of it's a myth. But even that he sort of says lovingly in a still sort of a backhanded way. And so I thought, okay, we're going positive even with things that I know Wells wouldn't be usually positive with. And I thought to me that was like this moment of him trying to play politically in the center here. Like, one thing that, generally in politics, there's parties and all that stuff, but sometimes it's like, well, the the office of the American presidency is great. We should all support it as a national idea. And I thought, oh, Wells is really getting nationalistic here in a way we sometimes see, but not all the time. And then of course it turns into criticism.
Yeah.
But anyway, very surprising. Sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
No, not this is a roundabout conversation. And as I've said over many other episodes of these Orson Welles almanacs and commentaries and things like that, that it's a fascinating deep dive into this period that we tend to paint over, spending early 1945 thinking about the Battle of the Bulge and the hopes for if you were to read the magazines, the consumer product manufacturers are already starting to promise the happy ending to come, where all the soldiers would be coming home, and of course they would need new houses and new refrigerators and new cars, and so it seems to me oftentimes histories of this period don't stick in the moment, but look forward, or look back, or looking at the war, and so how interesting to be thinking about issues and problems and things like that here at home. I was most struck, because it was the very first time I've heard it, by the myth making about the presidency. As I said, it given that these days we dump on the human frailties these days of presidents, and think of them as very human, very full of faults, very much questioning. We've decreased the power of many presidents in our national thinking until we want to blame them for something, and that's when they're in charge, and they're so this idea that Roosevelt is already among the pantheon. I was fascinated to see here Orson Welles talking about him in the same breath as Washington and Jefferson and Jackson and Teddy Roosevelt. We don't often do that anymore with our current sitting president, to put him on Mount Rushmore. And then I was fascinated by his analogy to bridegrooms. It's like that. Wait a minute, that sounds like you're a nun joining the cloisters. That somehow you're the bridegroom of Christ, or the bridegroom of the nation. Of course, he's, I can then imagine him, the president standing up in his tux and tails that Roosevelt always looked good in, but bridegroom, a bridegroom up on Mount Rushmore. My goodness, it's both a tribute to him, but impossible sort of hagiography that if I were a normal human being, I'd be going, but I have a whole I'm not making these decisions all by myself. This my administration, my generals in the war, my Secretary of State, they're doing things. And so I find it fascinating, but always a little bit dangerous to reduce everything to just the power of one man.
Yeah.
But of course, that is the reason to support Roosevelt for a fourth term, or even a third term. These extraordinary extensions of what is supposed to be democracy. This one human staying in office, I would say Kim Jong-il, sort of forever. So I'm fascinated by this extraordinary situation. Of course, many Americans who voted for Roosevelt this time around said, we've got to get the job finished. We can't switch leadership when we're, when we've got to get these world wars finished, and all these other things. So that is what impressed me so much on the first round. And then, as you said, Vincent and Daryl, the then extraordinary beating up on him for stuff in the past, appeasing Japan. We're 4 years after, that appeasing Japan. But of course, to go back and say you never should have done that, it's fascinating. And
well, it's hard too when the whole, or at least a large portion of the country, was wanting us to be isolationists, not to be in the war.
Yeah.
So I think appeasing Japan is what a lot of folks wanted him to do, and so that's why he probably did that. He may not have thought it was the right thing to do at the time, but the thing he had to do. Yeah.
And yet to balance that with Welles's praise for Lend-Lease, saying that Lend-Lease would be the most important thing, which was, of course, for a way around the U.S. Congress being unwilling to give money to fund direct. I mean, our direct involvement in the European conflict.
Right.
Here was a way around it by claiming we're not selling. It's kind of like what we're doing with Ukraine these days. We're just lending these articles of war to help a friend out. It was a brilliant, as they said, way around the conservative Congress that kept wanting us, demanding we be isolationist. And so if praise of that is taking the bigger worldview of what is right and what is moral and saying, which is not a very democratic thing to say, to go around the wishes of many people and to involve us in war in many ways, it just points up how difficult it is to be a leader. And Wells is putting an awful lot of pressure on him. You are the number one figure in the world who needs to bring democracy everywhere else. And, so I think it's a fascinating piece with essay recording with a lot of hopes, a lot of fears, but again, the hagiography that only the president can do it, I think is going to help fuel Republican backlash in the couple of years to come. So,
yeah, I mean, Wells knows that. I honestly, I think he knows term limits are coming. He says that specifically. He's like, even most people who voted for you don't believe in a fourth term, and they didn't really even believe in a third term. But I think you're right. I think Wells saw this as honestly a moment to get something that he wanted. I'm not sure that Roosevelt wanted, right? But one thing that we see in the commentaries that Wells wants above all is he wants a League of Nations, and he wants like this. He literally wants a world government. He says that constantly. He wants a world government with actual power and actual empowerment of people. Literally, he makes this point about everyone, all this stuff. And I think he sees FDR as the beacon that might be the only beacon that's going to get him there. That's one thing that he specifically mentions. You didn't support the League fast enough. We could have done this a long time ago. But I think Wells sees this war as an opportunity to make that happen. And of course, we see some movement for that. It never goes nearly quite the level that he wants. But I think then he starts playing with that fire, like you said, that sort of anti-democratic fire, which he's thinking about like, oh, well, people don't want these third or fourth terms. But, one of the good things about long presidencies is that you can learn from your mistakes, right? That's actually something that dictatorships will criticize democracies for, is that there's so much turmoil, there's so much turnover, change in policies. Well, we never change. We're going to have total, consistency. I can get this done. Right. Wells sees that as like, this is going to get me to this radical thing that I want to happen. I think the other thing too is, I really think that he sees the momentum and he's fine with the power. Oh, the other thing I was going to say is he knows that one of the main roles of the president is foreign policy, right? And so he sees this also as like, Congress is probably not going to do this, but we can get a president who's really going to be involved in foreign policy, and he'll support this in strengthening this, empowering, like you said, this literally like angelic superhero like idea of a president, if that's going to get the job done. I also think building up a president's sort of cachet largely is important, because that's something America does not deal with very well, is that other countries really oftentimes sort of extra make fun of our presidents, especially obviously our enemies, but weak, feeble. And Wells really wants to keep pushing this idea of FDR. He also probably knows how sick FDR is, I would imagine, more so than anyone else. And so Wells is continuing his mouthpiece for FDR not only being a good president, but perhaps the greatest president, to move this narrative away from, his ailments, his disability.
Yeah. Well, like you said, when did we limit the term limits to 2 terms? Was it immediately
after this? But it starts after this.
Yeah. So I thought
it's pretty unanimous too. That's the one thing I was a little surprised. It wasn't completely unanimous. So the first started passing in 1947. So pretty much like right after this, that had to go through a bunch of phases. Was completed by 51. Was ratified by a huge amount of Congress, not completely by partisan lines, but like 50, I think there's like 50 Democrats, but 36 out of 48 states ratified it. and 6 of those states that didn't ratify it, they just never said anything about it. Only 2 officially did not vote
Wow.
for it. Oklahoma and Massachusetts declined it. So it was pretty unanimous, and fairly across party lines as that ever goes. So yeah, pretty popular.
That's amazing. Well, it would have been interesting to see if they allowed 3 terms, whether Obama would have ran for a 3rd term, and then having Obama versus Trump would have been a really interesting election. But and we could have seen how that would have played out. Because I don't know. I think the Obamas were kind of tired at that point, and I don't think they would have gone for a 3rd term, but you don't know. So anyway, we have Terry Phillips popped in to join us, which is great. We were talking about the inauguration commentary of Orson. Did you get a chance to listen to that, Terry?
I did.
Yeah, oh, good. And look, you came in to bring us home. We've been chatting about perfect again. You're perfect. Your timing is perfect.
Thinking about presidents and experts on presidents.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So what were your thoughts on this? And how was, if you want to compare to, because of course you're a Reagan guy, if you want to compare to anything with Reagan, that would be fine too. So you're
well,
free.
let me begin by thanking you for letting me in. I'm sorry that I joined you late, but we're on the road with my play, and you know, that's my tip of the hat to Orson Welles. Theater comes first. And I'm at the moment I'm in Carmel by the Sea, a beautiful little coastal seaside town in along the Central California coast. We had a couple of weeks in Santa Barbara, and after we pack up the truck, we're moving to Fresno later today for one night. But I saw the comparison not just because Orson Welles had this amazing capacity to take whether it was politics or art or anything else and dramatize it. In my case, I was interested because in my play, Ronald Reagan Saves the World, go to reaganplay.com for more. Ronald Reagan says that losing is something that every politician faces. It's a possibility that has to be dealt with. And if that happens, you smile, you wish the other fellow well, and you move on. He said, it's always been this way. It's why our democracy works, and it will always be that way. Of course, when Franklin Roosevelt was elected for the 4th time, it scared a lot of people because just as in the earliest days of our republic, many people were hypersensitive to the risk of the United States turning into a monarchy. And even some of the terminology that was used to describe George Washington, Your Highness, that was something that he said, no, that's not the country we live in. And I think Orson Welles tapped into that spirit in this commentary. But we are, as we all know, and regardless of one's political philosophy or point of view, we are in an era fraught with danger. We don't know from day to day, let alone from election to election, where we're headed. And I think Orson Welles was very aware of that too. It's so interesting, and it's something I appreciate as a playwright. It's so interesting to look at history through the lens of what's happening in our world today. And if you've heard me say this before, we can't judge what happened in the past by today's standards, but we don't have to judge. It's kind of right in front of us. We are seeing this play out in a scary way. I say this with all due respect to people who hold partisan points of view. I'm not a member of a political party, but I think we are all a little on edge because we don't know where we're headed. Right. To quote Franklin Roosevelt when he was asked, "Are we, what kind of a country are we? A republic, if you can keep it?" That's the question facing us.
Well, and the fact that it seems like whoever wins, a large portion of the country is feeling like, oh my gosh, it's sort of the end of, not the end of the world necessarily, but the end of democracy, the end of when either side feels that way, it's not good. I mean, you want it to be okay, we'd like our side to win, but if we don't win, the other person's going to be in there for 4 or 8 years, and then it'll flip back the other way, and that's just sort of how our country works. And but I never remember a time when we thought, oh my gosh, it could be the end of everything if the wrong person wins. And it'd be one thing if you had one side thinking that, but the fact that you have both sides thinking that is really interesting and different. So yeah. Anything, what stood out on this one, Terry, just for what, were you surprised with how aggressive Orson's letter got against FDR and things? I mean, that was, to me, I was just like, oh, I was expecting him to come on. My open letter is this wonderful tribute thing, and it's like, you did this wrong and you did this wrong, and how did you do this? What a stupid thing for you to do.
Yeah, he was pretty harsh.
Yeah.
I think that might have been, you always have to wonder with Orson Welles how much of it is drama, the play is the thing, and how much of it was how he truly felt. I think this probably came closer to his true feelings than we might like to believe about him, that he was, because he had this position, not only sort of an insider with the Roosevelt administration, but because he had the ear of, however many listeners he had. I think he felt an obligation not to be too cozy with the man he admired and supported, that he wanted to say, okay, I've got your back, but you got to fix these things. And I think it's important for those of us who do have a public platform, as I have had in my life, to try to be honest and hear both sides. And I think that Orson Welles was doing that. He was not a journalist, but he was being journalistic in his even-handedness.
Yes.
But you're right, Daryl. I was taken aback by how harsh he was.
Yeah.
It is hard. Go ahead, Kathy. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and yet what an extraordinary moment in American and sort of world history that these months were. That this hideous global conflict that no one had ever experienced quite the like of was ending, and here was this moment. Well, and we hadn't even exploded the atomic bomb yet. That's so here was this moment to change everything and improve the entire globe. So just the possibility for so much good to come out of so much horror is an extraordinary moment for people who lived through it.
So Kathy, I think mentioning the bomb here is really important too, because this is another sort of blip before another blip, which is the Commentaries. Wells says specifically, we need the destruction of the Japanese empire. He says it as strongly as possible. In the Commentaries, he's obsessed with the bomb is a terrible idea. It was a bad idea. Everything we did was terrible with the bomb. Save the world from the bomb. But here he's, again, this most burning liberal here seems to be in full support of destroying the Japanese empire. He doesn't qualify it. He doesn't say how you're going to do it. I suspect he probably doesn't mean drop the nuclear bombs, but unequivocally, he says destroy it. He doesn't say the same thing when he says to Germany. He says, oh, we need to make sure Germany doesn't have an army anymore. He says destroy the Japanese empire. And so I think this shows that, obviously he learned his own lesson, but even he seems to be on the side of destruction at whatever cost.
Vincent, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I was born after the Second World War, so I have the luxury of being able to hold an opinion about something I was not alive to at least I certainly wasn't alive to be of age. And so many of people of my parents' generation felt very strongly that it was essential for the United States to use the atomic bomb to save lives, specifically American lives. And just as I've said on other topics, we shouldn't judge points of view from the past by our standards today. This is a place where I take exception, because we do know better now. And I think Wells was in kind of a funny position, because he was holding two somewhat contradictory opinions, but I like that. He was able to do it with authority and in a reasoned way. And that really appealed to me.
And Terry, you mentioned at one point that he might have been thinking about his audience and how big of an audience he had or whatever. Like we were saying earlier, these are the ones that were supposedly not aired at all. So his audience, I think, is the four of us currently. And, and then when I release this, it'll be a bigger audience, but we shall see. It's kind of funny to think that when I release these, they may be getting heard by more people than they've ever been heard by ever, because it's going to be at least 2,000, 3,000 people that are going to hear this. And I don't know if 2,000 or 3,000 people have ever heard this. I mean, it's buried on sites, various places, but not many places. Anyway,
I don't know if you all discussed this before, but I did not know that he originally did this for CBS and not for ABC, where he eventually.
Oh, that's right. It did say CBS.
7:15. I don't remember what night. I think Friday night or something.
Friday, I think. Friday, yeah.
And I don't have any knowledge of why he made the switch. Maybe it was a money deal. I have no clue.
Well, it's probably out of his hands. That it's whatever ad agency could place this.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well, Vincent, because I think you'll probably know the timelines better than anybody else. So he has a commentary that's in the newspaper that he's writing.
The New York Post.
Yeah. And then he has this set of commentaries that we're listening to from this batch that are done earlier than his second set of audio commentaries that we've listened to, the 60 or whatever episodes. Mm-hmm. Where does this all lay as far as, did this first set of commentaries come before he ever started his commentary in the newspaper? Did his commentary in the newspaper come first and was running throughout most of this? Did his commentary in the newspapers continue past where his second set of commentaries end after Woodard? So his comment somewhere in there, they were started before this. Yes.
And
so continued, but then the newspaper one stopped somewhere during the commentaries that he would switch over and do the audio commentary sort of thing.
That's right, exactly. So I don't have the dates in front of me, but he started the newspaper, the New York Post, I want to say early 1944. It might have been 43. I don't remember. It was definitely through 44 and definitely went into 45. I don't remember how far into 45. I think it might have been at least the end of the war. But he continues to do the commentaries on ABC until the early 46, right?
Yes.
So it basically goes newspaper. That's where he sort of gets his hands wet in political commentary. Although like all the things we've watched and listened to, it goes from political commentary to Hollywood gossip to, all sort of weird random things. Then he does this show, which never goes anywhere, still does the Post. Then he does his commentary show. And then in the middle of the commentary show, the Post, he gets basically fired or let go from the Post.
Okay. And then he does those audio, and he doesn't do them till early 46. He does them until late 46, I think.
Late 46, okay.
Because they go off, I want to say in October of 46, I think is the last commentaries. So which I'm airing now, and as an insult to all of you folks, the last time when I played them through, I got busy with the beginning of my school year. And so I played through the Woodard ones. I don't even know if I 100% aired the fifth Woodard one. I think I did. And then the rest just laid there for a long period of time. And now I've been playing them a second time through. And now I'm at the point where I'm recreating the new. So essentially there's new episodes that are coming out that people haven't heard before that we recorded, whatever it was, 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, I'm not sure. So that's kind of funny, the last few. But the thing is, the last few, they weren't that great. They were sort of him resigning to the fact that the show was going away. He had a substitute host 1 week, and then 1 week I just played the one for the first time where he does Moby Dick, and that's why I wanted to do for us chatting about Moby Dick, the performance that he does. And then the ones after that, I mean, they're political and all that, but they just have a different feel to them, and then they sort of drift away. So, but we'll be presenting all those. So that's finally, people will hear you folks' voices as we go. But I guess Have we covered this enough? Vincent, is there more stuff we should chat about with this one, or we think we're good? Okay.
Yep, good.
Yeah. So it's good. I mean, this is a 45-minute intro to a 15-minute show again. So I think that's appropriate.
Oh, but worth it. There's so much is packed into this
Oh, I
short
know.
episode. It'd be great to use for teaching, to say, how is he building these different rhetorical arguments? You know, what kind of metaphors is he using in here? A history class could say, let's go research all the things he's talking about. And
well, I mean, I agree with that 100%. I think this is one of the best ones we've ever presented. And as far as historical importance, I think this episode is probably in the top 7 or something of all his commentaries he ever did. And it's buried in these unreleased ones, because most of the unreleased ones, we do them, it's great, but we'll listen to them and go, oh, I remember a rehash of this that he did on the other commentaries. Most of them he brings across. He can't really bring across one about the inauguration when the president's alive after the president's passed away. And then certainly he wouldn't bring this open letter where he's criticizing the president into his tribute to the president. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. So there was just no way to really do this one again in any fashion. So it's charming that we have this, and I'm delighted, and that we have these all in such great sound is wonderful. And yeah, it's all good. So we'll leave it there, and thanks everybody. Enjoy. Please make sure you listen to the commentary. Don't just listen to us. Orson is almost as important as Terry. So it's close. It's close. There's always those arguments going on in our comments section. Yes.
A quick addition that I just in my Googling, I'll admit. So apparently you were talking about the New York Post articles. So part of what we listen to here is adapted from a post that he made in the New York Post.
Okay.
So published January 22nd, 1945 in the New York Post. Okay. Especially the section of where he talks about the inauguration as a betrothal. He talks about Washington, Jefferson. So basically all the beginning. It doesn't seem like the chastising is in it. Yeah. But it seems like all the setup seems to be in the Post. I'd have to look at the whole Post article, but anyway, they're connected. So literally in this case, we see a connection, a rehashing from actually an adaptation, an extension of the New York Post.
Adaptations.
Yeah.
Which he tends to do a lot. So, hey. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Enjoy, and we'll see you next time.